Welcome, everyone. This is Michael Gummel from Paradigm Technology Consulting. Thank you for joining us today for our monthly ISV Spotlight. Today, we will be taking a look at a product called NETSTOCK. And Russ from NETSTOCK will be walking us through how we can improve our inventory capabilities. We'll be talking about some of the issues that a lot of people run into with inventory and how we can solve those issues by utilizing NETSTOCK as well as your ERP, whether that be Dynamics GP or other systems. So Russ has been in the ERP business for nearly 30 years. He's worked with a lot of manufacturers, distributors, and retailers on how to improve their processes. So with that, just a couple of housekeeping things before we get in here. Everyone will be on mute, so if you do have any questions, please use the chat bar. In addition, we are recording this session as well to be posted up onto our YouTube page, so if you've missed anything as we go through here, you'll be able to get the link and take a look at that. So with that, I will turn it over to Russ. Russ?
All right, thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. And thank to all of you that are in attendance with us today or possibly viewing this recording at a later time. Appreciate you spending that time and effort to do so. And hopefully this will have some good value for you. Hoping to wrap this up in maybe about 35 minutes or so. And as Michael mentioned, we'll have time after that to answer a few questions if there are any being posted in that dialog box. So at NETSTOCK, we work with small, medium-sized businesses all across the country and actually around the globe. We are a global organization. And so these are, of course, inventory-based businesses. So distributors, manufacturers, retailers, and increasingly e-tailers, you know, lots of e-commerce oriented businesses now that are just geared strictly in that market. And for most of them, the value of the inventory is actually the largest asset on their balance sheet, right? In some cases, there may be some real estate that might exceed that number, but regardless, it is absolutely core to the business. It's what you guys do, and properly managing that inventory is really critical to overall profitability and health and growth of the business. And so it's a mission critical function. And so, you know, what we see is the majority of these businesses are using multiple tools to kind of manage this critical asset. Certainly, everybody's got some sort of an ERP or an accounting software application. So in this audience, a lot of those are Dynamics GP users. But there may be some Acumatica prospects or users. There may be some Dynamics 365 BC, kind of the new cloud focus for Microsoft. So but whatever that ERP accounting software is, people are using those to capture lots of transactions, managing things that are going on day to day in the business. But there's also certainly prevalence of third-party add-ons. In the case of an inventory environment, those might be warehouse management type solutions that bolt on to the core ERP. So whether that's like a high jump Accelos type application on the high end, or a more straightforward barcode application like Panatrack, whatever that might be, those third-party add-ons bring additional functionality to the core business application. And then, of course, we certainly see a lot of use of Excel spreadsheets as well, and other third-party add-ons and other utility and productivity type tools. Michael, I noticed there is some background noise. I don't know if there's some folks that need to be muted, perhaps. That might make it a better atmosphere for all. Thanks. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of those specifics. But before I dig into that particular topic, I want to give this just a little bit of context, if you will, because there's kind of a difference between what we call inventory control and inventory replenishment, but they both fall under this concept of inventory management. And a lot of times when we use the phrase or the term inventory management, our thoughts first turn to this one aspect of it, which is really what I call inventory control. So it's the physical management of the product, the picking, packing, shipping, receiving, the movement of the product from one warehouse to another, perhaps, maybe even bin level management within a warehouse, certainly doing physical counts and hopefully cycle counts that are being done for our more critical items in the inventory. And then that's where tools like a barcode application, handheld devices and so forth, and those kinds of technologies might facilitate accurate and efficient capturing of all that data and all that movement. So critical function, obviously, you've got to know how much you have and where it is, and all those kinds of things. Absolutely important for you to do that. But it doesn't address the flip side of the coin, which is what we call inventory replenishment. It doesn't tell you, is it the right stuff at the right place at the right time at the right levels? And so that's the piece that we call replenishment, or sometimes you'll hear the phrase inventory optimization or demand planning and forecasting, all kind of related terms to this side of the inventory management piece that says, okay, I know what I have, but is it the right stuff? And so to understand that, to be able to answer that question, I've got to be able to do some reasonable forecasting of what my future demand is going to be. I need to understand other aspects of my supply chain so that I'm placing proper orders and ordering those at the right time, right? Placing those orders on a timely basis that understands lead times and all the other issues going on within my supply chain. And then hopefully there's some prioritization going on there as well. And so that I'm focusing on the right items, on the most important and most profitable items, et cetera. So there's a lot that goes on that side that we sometimes don't think about. And of course, that's the focus of the NETSTOCK application and of our topic today. So I wanted to make sure we had that context. So I think the next thing is to think about what happens if we don't get this right, right? And there's really three key things that occur within your inventory if we're not managing this replenishment cycle and this replenishment process properly. And the worst thing that can happen, of course, is stocking out of a product. If I run out of inventory or a particular product when there's a demand from one of my customers, I've got a couple of serious risks. One is I could potentially lose that sale because I have lots of competition out there in the world. We have a high expectation level that's been created amongst our consumer class at this point. And if I can't meet their needs, my customers are likely to go find another resource and go make that purchase. So now I lose that sale. If that happens often enough, or maybe even only that one time, and that customer of mine has a great experience with a competitor, I also have a high level of risk of losing that customer altogether. And the reality is that customer loyalty is not what it once was, right? Again, those expectations are very high. We all have these Amazon connections now that set expectations for us as a consumer. And so now that has raised the bar quite high. And that loyalty is really not what it once was. So I'll lose that customer. So worst thing that can possibly happen. Unfortunately, the way that many businesses deal with that risk and try to solve that problem is simply by buying too much. So I overbuy and I don't really fully understand the impacts of that excess inventory. What is that costing me to have too much inventory sitting on my shelves? And that's a real big challenge. And that's a predominant situation that see with a lot of our prospects and customers that we first get involved with is a ton of excess inventory sitting in the warehouse. And then there is the productivity issue, right? We have buyers or planners within our organizations that are responsible for making these purchase decisions. And first of all, they've got competing interests here. They're getting hammered by the sales side that says, look, I don't ever want to run out of product because I can't afford to lose a sale and potentially lose a customer, legitimate complaint, an issue. But then also, those folks are also getting hammered by the C-suite and the controllers and accountants in the organization that are saying, hey, we just did a physical count. You're now at year end, and I've got way too much inventory on the books. We need to skinny that down. So now the person in the middle that's responsible for managing those competing interests is really challenged, really under a lot of stress, and they just don't have appropriate tools. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. And instead of doing things that are of a higher level and more fulfilling, to be honest with you, and less stressful role in the organization, where I can really work with my vendors, negotiate prices, look for ways to streamline my supply chain, all those things that are kind of more fun to do in that role. Instead, I end up spending all my day putting out fires, expediting orders, and getting heat from people in the organization about not getting things right. So it's a very challenging environment for sure. And so what we're really trying to address is to get to a best practices sort of model, right? The way that we can create that more profitable warehouse that solves these problems is really all about buying smart. So what we call creating an optimal order. And so the optimal order is one that takes into account all kinds of factors, again, in that supply chain. And if your process in buying and determining what your demand plan looks like and how often you need to buy and so forth, if it doesn't accommodate your ability to quickly and easily create that optimal order, then you really need to seriously look at replacing that approach, right? What am I doing wrong? What tools am I using? And how can I do this better? And so there's lots of different factors that get involved in creating this optimal order. First of all, you have to really, I mentioned it earlier, prioritization. You really need to understand what the nature of the items are in your inventory so that you can focus on the most important items. And so looking at not only the value of the item, but how fast it moves, what the popularity is of it, and so forth. Then we need to be able to really understand what we would call a safety stock or a buffer stock, right? And there's a difference between safety stock and excess stock. A safety stock is there because we have some uncertainty in the supply chain, right? We have some volatility in our demand. We can't fully accurately 100% know exactly when there's going to be demand for every item. In fact, we may have items that are seasonal. We may have multiple seasons in a year. There could be some outside influences that are impacting things in terms of getting product in, especially if I've got longer lead times and product coming from overseas, whether that's Europe or China or South America. We see products coming in from all over the world. And so I've got to be able to manage how well my suppliers are doing, how long that delivery time looks like, other outside factors in the marketplace. So I really need to have a buffer that manages those risks. And anything above and beyond that buffer is what we would identify as being excess or inventory that's not needed, right? I've got to be able to get ahead of the curve, be able to see in advance what I expect to be running out of based on what's going on, for example, or what I'm expecting to get too much of if I've got an order coming in that I don't need yet. So alerts for understanding not only where I stand today, but what my nearby horizon looks like so that I can take action and resolve those things. And so the more warnings and alerts that I have and get ahead of the curve is going to make me much more effective in managing my inventory. And one of the biggest challenges in this area is creating that forecast, really understanding what the demand is. We talk to so many folks that are using very rudimentary techniques and calculations to try to figure out the demand. They're looking at the last 3 months usage and extrapolating that, for example, so I can run a report out of my Dynamics GP environment, for example, that tells me what my last 3 or 6 months looks like. Well, that's one view of it, but it's not a broad enough view, right? Or I'm getting feedback from my sales team and my sales manager, VP of sales, that says, hey, this is what we think we're going to sell in the next quarter or the next 6 months or year, depending on lead time. So based on that projection, this is what I need you to buy. Well, we all know that salespeople are inherently optimistic folks, and we see an awful lot of excess inventory being purchased based on sales forecasts from a sales team that don't ever come to fruition. So we really need to have forecasts based on real data that goes back over a long time horizon, and that has the ability to look at weird spikes and dips and smooth those out, look at seasonal patterns and so forth. You just have to have the data to be able to do that. And that's not an easy task in a standard accounting or ERP application. So it's all about having the right tool. And what we see most often as the wrong tool being used is the spreadsheet. And we understand why that is, why spreadsheets are so prevalent. One is they're on everybody's desktop. Everybody has typically some ability to get into Excel and start creating some spreadsheets and some formulas and some calculations there. And usually within an organization, there's at least one, what I would call a real Excel wizard, right? Somebody that really knows their way around the application, can really do some amazing things with that product. And it's a killer application. There's no question about it. But sometimes that gives us a false sense of security as well, that, yeah, I've got somebody that has written all these fancy calculations and formulas and pivot tables and all this stuff. And it still turns out to be nowhere near a best practices approach, right? Because there's no way it can take in all of those other things that we just talked about in terms of forecasting and safety stock calculations and really understanding supplier performance on lead times and all those other inputs that really have to be part of the decision process, just are not part of that Excel environment. And there's all kinds of other inherent challenges with Excel. We've actually done entire webinars and a whole series of blogs on the topic. If you were to go to our website, you could find those, where there's issues with data synchronization and timing. There's control issues all kinds of challenges. And so the result is you don't get a best practices environment, which means you don't get to that optimized inventory, which again, by definition, having the lowest possible inventory value, so you're keeping your controllers and accounting types happy, right? Lowest possible inventory value, but still with the highest possible service to your customers, which keeps the sales team happy. So that it is possible to achieve that. Now, it's never going to be perfect, right? Because forecasts are not perfect, our supply chains are not perfect, but get to a point where you're doing the best possible job in reducing those inventory values and still achieving high fill rates and customer service to your customers. So if you can do that, you'll know that you've got the right tool. You'll know what based on the results and ease of use, right? So if you can easily get access to the information, and again, your accounting and ERP softwares that you guys are using, the Dynamics GP and others, Acumatica, do a fantastic job of capturing all these transactions all day long. You understand exactly where things are, and all that detail is captured, but it tends to be in about 7, 8, 10, maybe more tables and files within that ERP environment. So getting to that data is not easy. Maybe you've even used the folks at Paradigm to help you extract data and getting into certain report writing tools, whether it's SQL or natively integrated report writing tools to try to get at this information, so you understand how challenging that is to get one nice aggregated view. But if you can do that, you really get insights and visibility into your items and what's going on with those and what the health of those are. And so the ideal tool really puts all that disparate data from the ERP and maybe from your warehouse management solutions and so forth, and gets that into one nice dashboard that really gives you a quick snapshot that says, here's where we stand, here's where I've got challenges. And then you have the ability to make decisions because you can prioritize and manage by exception. You've got hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of SKUs in your inventory. It's really impossible to know and to find the time to solve all the issues all the time every single day, right? So what you really need to be able to do is manage by exception, show me those that are really most out of whack, that are causing me the biggest pain, and solve those, and the next day come back and solve the next batch that's next highest on my list, and so forth. And if you can do that, you can't help but get to where you want to get to in terms of reducing those stock out situations and minimizing your inventory as well. So you'll know you found the right tool because it covers all those. It provides that best practices, and that's great. But there's still a challenge, right? Even at a very effective tool may not still be the solution for your organization if A, it's too expensive, or B, it's too difficult to implement or to use. It takes too long to get up and running. It's hard to understand. And sometimes that's the challenge with some ERP applications. There are some tools out there that try to take a step further towards this replenishment solution, but either they fall short or they're just too difficult to manage and understand and use. And so you could still have the right tool and not get benefit of it if you don't have something that's easy to work with. And importantly, if the whole team doesn't agree that we're all in on this, right? Change management can be very difficult, especially if you're coming out of one of these spreadsheet environments. Someone on the team has spent a lot of hard work and time and effort and built a really strong application, done the best possible job. There's a certain pride of ownership there, and there's a trust there. Even if we know that there's probably some formulas that aren't quite right or some inputs that aren't really part of that picture, there's still some comfort level there. And so changing from that to another tool can be difficult. Any change is difficult. And so you've got to really have a top-down approach. You've got to have an executive sponsor that really says, guys, this is the way we're going to do this. And you have a resource in Paradigm as a trusted advisor that really understands your business that can also help you affect that change. So I would recommend that you really take advantage of that as you go through a change process. And because if you can do that, now you have the right tool and the right processes and the right buy-in to really make a game-changing decision for your business in terms of managing inventory. So that's kind of the framework, right? That's the environment that we're in. And again, we've literally, our company, NETSTOCK, has now implemented close to 1,400 companies around the globe, about 800 of those in North America. So we have hundreds and hundreds over the last 8 years of implementations where we've gathered the experience. And what I've just described to you is commonplace. So don't feel like you're out there if you're nodding your head and you're seeing yourself in this environment, you're not alone. Every one of your colleagues in the same industry and in other distribution manufacturing environments is dealing with the same challenge since the day one. The problem is that even in small, medium-sized businesses today, those supply chains have gotten pretty complex, right? Buying overseas with long lead times, omni-channel sales environments, maybe using 3PLs to help with the distribution pattern across the geographies. Very complex environments that the big guys have always been used to. Now all of a sudden, here's small, medium-sized businesses dealing with these global challenges, really, and not having the appropriate tools. So the NETSTOCK team came together and said, look, we can do this better. We can provide an application geared towards that middle market organization that is now struggling, trying to use spreadsheets and other semi-manual or manual processes to solve this, and we can make this work. They've got decades of experience in those larger businesses and very complicated supply chains. So a very experienced, really a world-class team that came together to build the NETSTOCK application and geared it towards that small, medium-sized market. And what we said was some 8-9 years ago when we built the organization and built the first versions of the app was that the one thing that we can do is we can now rely on the cloud as a delivery mechanism, right? The internet was stable, it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. Everybody's used to using cloud applications in our own personal lives, right? We all use Gmail and tools like that for a decade or more now. So at that point, clearly that was a viable delivery method, which meant I didn't have to send consultants on site at a very high cost to do that. So let's put together an application that's browser-based, cloud-based, on demand, anytime, anywhere, and just makes that easy for the end user. And then let's build those seamless integrations into the ERPs, and the Dynamics GP application was one of the first ones that we built an integration to many years ago that automatically on a nightly basis can extract the data from the back end of the database, grabs all the right files all at the right time, so it's all synchronized, it's done while you're sleeping. Takes a couple of minutes to grab the data and put it up into our internet environment, into our private cloud. And then we do some quick number crunching, typically maybe 20-30 minutes worth of analysis that we do on that raw data on a nightly basis. And we provide back to you a dashboard-driven, graphical color, very intuitive and interactive application that really gives you, again, that visibility and that health check, if you will, of the inventory. And by using management by exception, really highlights where you have your biggest challenges and where you need to take action today. And because of the way that we do that via the cloud, it can be done very quickly. Typical implementation can run anywhere. Well, typical, I guess, would say 4 to 6 weeks. We've done them as quickly as 2 weeks. In some more complex manufacturing environments, it might take more like 8 or 10 weeks. But very quickly, within a couple months or less, you have an application that is now giving you more insight into your business than you've ever had or would ever be able to do any other way. And because we deploy it via the cloud, we can follow kind of a software as a service pricing model, or this concept of a subscription. So easy in, low cost to get in, easy exit if it's not working for you for some reason or your environment changes, that you're not tied to long-term contracts and so forth. So what I thought I'd do as we wrap this up, and before we open it up for questions, just give you a quick feel for what it is I'm talking about with the NETSTOCK application. I've got 3 or 4 screenshots that I can share with you. And if that looks interesting, obviously we're happy to have a specific conversation with any of you at any time. You just work with your contacts at Paradigm to get that coordinated. But this is the dashboard that I was referring to. So if you logged into NETSTOCK as a user, you'd be presented with this dashboard. I'm showing 6 of the 9 widgets that are actually on the initial dashboard. And again, because this is a cloud application, literally every one of our nearly 1,400 companies around the globe every day is on exactly the same version, seeing exactly the same interface, right? We have the ability to do a lot of configuration of what data gets presented on this dashboard so that it adheres to the way you think about your inventory, your products lines, your suppliers, your buyers, the way you group inventory items and so forth, different warehouses and locations and grouping of those locations. All that can be configured. But the interface itself, very consistent, very solid, very easy to deploy and to use and understand. And so what you see here is a standard look and feel of a particular KPI or health check indicator. So in this case, I'm looking at excess stock. If you're seeing my mouse, my cursor move there. So I'm looking at excess stock. It shows me a trend line over the last 12 periods of how I'm doing with reducing that excess stock. I can see where I currently stand, how many items and what dollar value is represented by that excess. So clearly I've got a big problem that I'm still trying to solve. And then not only that, here's what we call our top 5 list that says here are the top 5 offenders, if you will, or contributors to this condition or this problem. So I can drill in with a quick click and see this whole data set if I want to look at the whole universe, and I can do all kinds of filtering and slicing and dicing and sorting within that environment. Or I can just focus on these top 5. Same way with stocked out items. Here, I'm currently out of stock on 973 items. That's potentially, based on my demand forecast, going to cost me 1.7 million in sales. What are those top 5 that are causing the biggest problem? Here's one right here that's going to cost me almost $80,000 in lost sales today if I don't solve that problem or figure out what I've got going with that. And then more forward thinking, as I mentioned earlier, here are what we call surplus orders, purchase orders that are already placed, that are on their way in, that when they arrive at the dock, they're going to contribute more to my excess problem. I didn't need them yet. So I got some 473 items in the tune of over $6 million worth on its way that I don't need yet. So I could be proactive here and call those suppliers and say, hey, hold off on that, or cancel that order, or delay that by a week or two, whatever I need to do with each of these items and each of those orders. And then also, conversely, I've got product that's currently in stock, so it's not showing out of stock yet, but we're projecting it will run out before the next replenishment arrives. I've got some 44 items that are at that status, which could potentially cost me almost another $400,000 in lost sales. So let's get ahead of the curve. If I've got POs created, expedite that, ship it faster so that I don't have that stock out condition. So just a really quick glimpse and understanding of where do I stand, where are my biggest issues, and some nice color coding and ability to drill in. I can drill down to any of these individual items that I'm showing on the dashboard and get a better understanding of what's going on so I can take action. Some of that color coding that you're seeing on the dashboard is coming from what we call our product classification functionality. And so we're doing an ABC analysis. So we're ranking all of our items by value, which is a pretty typical standard thing in inventory management environments. You may already be doing that with custom reports or Excel. But we're also at the same time going to analyze those same items based on velocity or speed of movement and give them a low, medium, high measurement. And out of the box, we follow the 80-20 rule, but you can tweak those parameters and configure that as well for your situation. But the net result is this 9-box color-coded matrix that says, here are the nature of the items in my inventory. And these guys up here in the upper right that are color-coded green are my most important bread and butter items, right? These are high-value, fast-moving items, probably driving the most profit in the business, and really the most important items for me. So that color coding, excuse me, is what shows up on this dashboard. So it really, again, helps me hone in on where I have my biggest issues and problems that I need to resolve most urgently. Then just a quick shot of what our forecasting looks like for an item. So we're looking at historical information as well as in a table as well as graphically, and with the ability to amend that forecast and adjust it based on my own tribal knowledge or feedback I'm getting from sales, which is certainly valid, but I don't want to build my entire forecast based on that sales input. I want to build it first on good, solid data, historical analysis, and really complex algorithms, which we have built into the app, and that function under the hood. We just do this for you. You don't have to necessarily fully understand it, but you can now make adjustments based on other feedback that you're getting. So it makes it very flexible and powerful that way and adaptable to your needs. And then the final piece is our ordering screen, or order schedule, we call it. This is where the rubber really meets the road for the buyers and the planners, and says, okay, based on all that analysis, all those forecasts, all that supplier performance analysis we're doing, all that forecast volatility that we're tracking, all those different components, we're saying based on all that, here's what you should order today, right now. So here's an inventory item from a supplier. It says NETSTOCK's telling me to buy 112 of those items at $78 a piece. I can see all the detail behind that. I can see all the forecast analysis. I can drill back into the item specifically if I need to do a little bit further analysis. But what we want to get to is an understanding and a trust of that number. Here's one item that's already stocked out. It's a green color coded item. This is a critical item for me. I'm out of it. I better get some more of this. And it looks at things like MOQs and multiples that I need to buy in and so forth. So it understands all that, and it allows me to build a perfect optimal purchase order like I referred to earlier. I can do that quickly now within minutes. I can build an optimal purchase order for this supplier and click a button, and it goes and creates that PO now in the GP or Acumatica or Dynamics 365, whatever your ERP environment is. I can automatically create that PO with a click of a button. So I do all my work and analysis and understand the recommendations and make my adjustments, add items if I need to fill containers, which we help you do with some intelligence and so forth. Do all that work here, and then click a button and the PO is created, and it follows the standard business rules from there. So just a quick glimpse and a high level view of kind of how we built the application and what our thought process is there, what our philosophy is behind this. We can open this up for questions at this point, and I'd be happy to chat with any one of you individually after the fact if you'd like to take a closer look, and we can talk about your specific situation. But the whole point of this is a game changer. We have a social media campaign that we use. That's hashtag ditch the spreadsheets, right? 90% of the companies that we're dealing with are coming out of big spreadsheet environments. In fact, out on our website, there is a success story for a GP user in Southern Utah, and they described that they had this 95 column, hundreds of lines long for all their SKUs spreadsheet that was a monster for them, that they were trying to leverage, spent all kinds of time and energy manipulating that, building that thing, using it, and it didn't get the results, right? They still were running out of some things and overstocking on other things. And the impact that we had on that business was huge. They were very willing to give us a success story, and they actually even did a video around it. So we know that people are using spreadsheets to try to solve the problem, and it's just never going to get you there. And hopefully we've made that case to at least explore some other options. So Michael, with that, I guess I'm at about the 30-minute mark since we got kicked off. I'll turn it back over to you and see if there's any questions or anything else we can dive into today while we have folks here.
Great, thanks, Russ. Thanks for all that information. Gave us a lot to think about. Hopefully, the individuals watching this, it sparks some questions and can certainly open up some conversations. I do see a couple questions out there. Okay. So let's see. The first one here. Does this solution work for multiple warehouses?
Yes, absolutely. So when we grab that data with the data extraction process every night, we're pulling it from each location. So we know exactly what our status is for every item in every location. And that dashboard can then represent a specific location or a combination. If my role as a planner or buyer is a regional one, and I've got 3 locations within my, say, Northeast region, I can easily combine those into one view and make purchasing decisions that way. So yeah, it fully understands multiple locations, whether those are real or virtual, right? You might have a physical location, but I've got a QC warehouse and a returns warehouse and a staging warehouse and an assembly area. Those could all be virtual warehouses within your ERP environment, and we can recognize those as well.
Very good, thank you. The next one coming in here, and I think you may have touched upon this, but maybe you can touch upon it a little bit more. How long is the implementation process, and how is it typically?
Yeah, I can dive into that a little bit. I did mention
one, right?
Yeah, we did talk about, from a timeline standpoint, again, the fastest I've seen is about 2 weeks for a distribution company. Certainly if you're rolling out a brand new ERP at the same time that you're rolling this out, that takes longer because there's a full process. But for an existing established ERP in a distribution manufacturing environment, I think the standard, the bell curve would say somewhere between 4 to 8 weeks is a typical timeline. Now, the other aspect of that is, because we've done so many implementations, I mean, we're literally implementing, anywhere from 20 to 30 a month at this point. We've done so many of these, we've really refined the methodology for how we deploy the application. It's really become a very smooth, consistent process. There are established coaching sessions with our experts that help walk you through the process. There's some self-learning, there's some video content. So it's a great combination and a great methodology that we've built. We can very quickly do the installation of our connector, as we call it, and get you that first dashboard. the bulk of the time we spend in those several weeks that we're working together on it is really in the refinement phase, where we're configuring the system, setting up those multiple warehouses, those different views, all those kinds of things, testing that. And we typically, what we want to do is we want to work with one individual, maybe two in some cases, within the organization, within the user site, to get all that configuration right. So somebody that really understands the nature of the business and the inventory, get it right, and then roll it out to the rest of the team that might be using it at whatever level. So we've got a very well-defined methodology that I think has resulted in a lot of success.
Very good. And I think this looks like it might be the last one. And I was for this one. This is the one we always get, and we always love talking about. I have a pretty good idea how yours is done. So maybe you can just talk in generalities. What is the pricing for NETSTOCK?
Sure. Yeah. Obviously, it's a critical question, and the glib answer is, well, it's a bargain at twice the price, right? And certainly price is a factor, but so is value and return on investment. And I think the way that we've built the pricing model makes a lot of sense from that standpoint, because we price based on the value of the inventory. So, for example, if a customer has $1 million worth of inventory on the books, it's going to be one price. If it's 10 million, it's a higher price. If it's $500,000, it's a lower price. And it doesn't necessarily scale linearly that way, but that's the broad concept. Within that, there are two components to the pricing. There's a one-time, what we call an activation fee, which covers that whole onboarding process and that methodology that I just talked about. So it gets you through the installation and the configuration, implementation, training, gets you to the support model. So that is a one-time activation fee. And then there's a monthly or annual subscription to access the service and use it on, and again, any browser, any device, anytime, anywhere. So there's no limit to the number of users or number of SKUs or number of warehouses or anything like that, strictly based on value of the inventory. I would say the bulk of our customers are, in the 5 to 10 million, maybe 2.5 to 10 million inventory range. And those numbers would range maybe somewhere from $6,000 to $10,000 as the one-time activation, and maybe $600 to $1,000 a month for the monthly service subscription type fee. So really cost effective. Again, no long-term contracts as well. A lot of value for that. If you do some quick back of the envelope math, for example, let's say you had that $1 million worth of inventory, and at least 10 or 15, or probably more likely 20% of that is in excess. That's a couple $100,000 sitting there in the warehouse, cash. Just think of it as stacks of cash bundled up on your warehouse instead of in the bank earning interest, or even better, driving other initiatives in the business. $200,000 are likely sitting there on the shelf in the warehouse gathering dust. And not only that, but it costs me money to have that money sitting there, right? I've got to pay what are called carrying costs, insurance, property taxes. I got to count it, move it around, takes up space in the warehouse. So I'm literally dropping another probably $40,000 or $50,000 per year in carrying costs just on that excess inventory. So the return on investment just in reducing my excess is huge and pays for itself within a couple of months. Not even to mention higher sales and higher profits because I'm not running out of stock, higher customer retention, and more productivity for those folks that they can be doing other things to tweak the supply chain and make it more efficient and cost effective. So the ROI and the payback is off the charts.
Very good, very good. So I'm not seeing any other questions out here. So at this point, I think we will go ahead and wrap it up. Again, thank you for attending. If you do have any questions, please reach out to us at Paradigm Technology Consulting. You can reach at us at sales@ptcllc.com, or you could always reach out to Russ at netstock.co. Again, NETSTOCK's website is www.netstock.co, or reach out to us at Paradigm at www.ptcllc.com. Again, thank you for your time today, and we look forward to talking to you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everybody, for your time today. Appreciate the opportunity.